Welcome to another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce. I'm your host, Stephanie Dobson. I am the founder, CEO, and content creator for Up a Notch Learning, Inc. And I'm pleased to bring you another guest who will bring you positive and constructive ideas, skills, and tools to help you on your quest to be a healthy, thriving family after divorce. I'm pleased to have with me today Barbara Rubel, who's known across the U.S. as an expert in traumatic stress, burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, resilience, managing complicated loss, and grief. Barbara has authored the book, But I Didn't Say Goodbye, Helping Families After a Suicide, and is the author of a widely acclaimed 30-hour course book for nurses, Loss, Grief, and Bereavement, helping individuals cope, and most recently the author of COVID-19 Loss, Grief, and Bereavement. She is a co-author of the training curriculum on compassion fatigue for the U.S. Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime, for whom she has been a consultant since 2003. Barbara has been featured on the Today Show, Fox Business, magazines such as Shape, Health, and Family Circle, and many other national and international media outlets. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm very excited about talking about a topic nobody wants to talk about.
Exactly, but they need to talk about for reasons we're going to be looking at. So today, Barbara and I will be talking not only about how to manage grief in the context of separation and divorce, but how to survive and to thrive. She will identify techniques to cope with disenfranchised grief and to make meaning of your loss experience. We will talk about the 4 tasks of mourning after a divorce, and we'll gain insight into why you're considered bereaved after a separation or divorce, and why you mourn this unique type of non-death related loss. All right, so let's get going, Barbara. So what does grieving look like for separating and divorcing families?
Our hearts do not know the difference between a divorce and a death. Our hearts could be broken, sometimes shattered into a million pieces, because grief is a process, whether it's a non-death related loss or a death-related loss. Of course, the intensity might be different. There might be different complications, but you'll feel the same thing. And what that grief process is physical reactions. So your body will talk to you. Emotional reactions, you'll feel certain things. Cognitive reactions, your thoughts will change. Behavioral reactions and spiritual reactions. Now, there is no list that says these are the top 10 spiritual reactions. You will help to try to find meaning in the loss. You will no longer believe in God. Every single person experiences different grief reactions, and it's your own unique grief process. When my father died, I was pregnant with triplets when I was told, and in the hospital giving birth, when I was told that my father killed himself. He shot himself in his head. And when I brought the babies home from the hospital 3 weeks later, I was painting a picture at night. I love to watercolor, I love to draw. And my hand hit the glass and the water spilled all over the watercolor painting of the flower. And I started to cry. And as I looked at this flower, I realized, or this mess, I said, that's what my grief looks like. That's grief, that it's just a mess of color, physical, emotional colors, cognitive, behavioral colors, spiritual colors, just blending together. And we have this palette of grief. So we have to move away from believing that we have to go through stages, because there are no stages of grief. That was a model by Kubler-Ross, God bless her, back in the 70s. And she applied that for those who were terminally ill and dying. But now we realize that grief is a process that ebbs and flows throughout our entire lifetime. We may be divorcing now and grieving now, but through the years, on the anniversary of the death or of the divorce, just like a death, we will grieve what was and what we remember.
Mm-hmm. When I talk to clients when they're separating or divorcing, I often talk about grief as in the stages of grief. And I talk about it in terms of a roller coaster, in that today you might feel one way and tomorrow you might feel a different way, and then the ebbs and the flows and the good days and the bad days, and you may feel angry on one day and you may feel really good and feel like you're ready to move on the next day, and then the following day after that you're back to sad, or all of these different emotions that come up. And you're right, it's not a linear process at all. It ebbs and flows based on how you're feeling.
Yeah, I love the metaphor because the roller coaster up and down, and sometimes you feel like you're never going to get off. It's like you are on that ride forever. So you have to listen as someone who works with those who are going through a divorce. As an attorney, you have to listen for their metaphor. I love that you use yours, but what are they saying? They may say, Stephanie, I feel like I'm drowning. I am drowning. You need to work on that metaphor. So you would say, it feels like you can't keep your head above water. Feels like another wave is going to hit you, right? Another wave and another wave. So I invite you to really think about metaphors because you've already used them with the roller coaster. And that is such a common one. That's a great one. But now listen to their metaphor. And when you say, yeah, you feel like you're drowning, if they say, the water's just over my head, or I'm quicksand, yeah, it feels like you keep going down and down and down. You listen for that, and they will really, truly understand that you understand what they're going
Mhm. And that metaphor of the roller coaster, I would say, is one that's more used right at the very beginning of my talking with them and helping them through their separation and divorce, because that's what I use to describe how they may be feeling over time. And so what they feel today may be
through.
different than what they feel tomorrow. And so then you're right, as I go through working with them, I'm able to really assess where on that roller coaster, my metaphor, are they in that particular day so that I can best help them. And it may be that they're not ready to talk about long-term solutions on a particular day because they've had a really bad day. And so then I can really listen for that and help them to make decisions when they're feeling in that mode that they're ready to make decisions.
You're so attuned to them. I mean, that is exactly what they need.
Mhm, mhm. So what characteristics impact divorce grief?
There are so many, just like a death. The duration, or how long were they married? Just like a relationship, if your child, God forbid, died, how old was the child? How long did you have a relationship with them? It's an attachment, right? So how long were you attached to that person? How with a time since the divorce? You might be working with someone after a second divorce, so you want to know even other divorces in their life. The changes in their identity. Who are they now that they're no longer that person's spouse? Changes in routines. So many routines are changed. I mean, that could be an hour just on that. Perspectives about the future. Well, how do they think their future is going to turn out, especially if their spouse is keeping monies from them, or if they had a traumatic experience, if it was domestic violence, sexual assault, cheating, all these things will impact divorce. Another thing that keeps coming up in the research too, impacts characteristic that impacts a divorce where the person really feels at a loss, they're grieving, they're bereaved, they're mourning, is because of the sudden nature. It might have just came out of left field. They had no idea that they were going to get divorce papers, no idea. So all the characteristics are very unique to the person who is going through the divorce. And they need to know that it's not just the grief process. It's not just that they're bereaved or robbed of a relationship or what they thought was going to be their future. It's not just that they're mourning. It is all of the influences or the characteristics that impact their grief and complicate it.
Now, I would be interested as to one step further than that. In a separation and divorce, there's lots of different negotiation processes that can be used. So there's, for example, there's divorce court, which so many of our viewers will be accustomed to based on our societal customs. But there's also divorce mediation. There's collaborative divorce. there's arbitration, there's numerous different divorce processes. And the processes that I work with families on is usually either the mediation or collaborative divorce. And so those are seen to be a way to preserve a relationship between spouses, to preserve that co-parenting relationship, to work together towards resolution, irrespective of the level of conflict between two spouses. And so I wonder what process, how that would impact the grief. My presumption would be that it would impact it positively in being able to better cope with the divorce process based on the process that you've chosen, the negotiation process.
Mhm. Absolutely, because we have to look for coping mechanisms and coping skills and people like yourself who are going to help us with our grief. Because when we enter into a divorce, we are in an unknown territory, just like a death. We've never gone through this, especially if it's our first time. And we need someone like you to hold our hands or guide us as we're experiencing the loss, as experiencing the grief, as we're experiencing the characteristics that influence and impact how we're going to cope that day. So whatever lane you take us down will help us manage our grief. It'll lessen it. It'll lessen the impact of it, because sometimes it's disenfranchised. So we need someone like you to help us.
Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that a little bit? I've heard of that term, disenfranchised grief. Can you expand?
Yeah. Disen- Disenfranchised grief is when you feel like you cannot explore your grief with others. You can't tell them, oh, I just got a divorce, or when the loss is not recognized. You have a pet and your dog just died and you loved that pet. He was a member of your family for 15 years, and you share that your pet just died, and they'll say, oh, go get a new dog. That disenfranchises your grief. Or you were 8 months pregnant and the baby died, and that perinatal loss, people would say, oh, well, it wasn't really a baby yet, or you'll have another baby, you're young. That those comments disenfranchise our grief. So when we say I just got divorced, and someone says, well, I never liked him anyway, and I never thought your marriage was good, that's going to disenfranchise my grief. Also, when the griever is not recognized, someone who has mental health issues, or if you're in a nursing home or a child, it's when you also don't grieve in socially accepted ways. Maybe people expect you to be stoic. Yeah, you're divorced. Why are you crying? Why are you being so demonstrative and intuitive? What they want you more instrumental. And it's really basically when you can't acknowledge to some people that you got a divorce because of stigma or shame in a particular community. And also, you might be divorcing because it was an abusive relationship or a same-sex relationship, where if you say we're getting a divorce, well, you weren't really married anyway, or he or she wasn't a good person anyway. So when you have this perceived lack of social support, or you avoid mourning publicly because of the divorce, that will disenfranchise your grief process. And so it's very common, and it's normal to experience disenfranchised grief in an abnormal world where people don't understand what you are going through.
Mm. So it sounds like another word for that would be grief that's been interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So from the natural grieving process, that
Mm.
whatever your natural grieving process is, we talked a moment ago about how there's nothing linear about that process, but when your grief is unacknowledged or is put down to a way that someone calls it something unnatural, or you shouldn't be feeling that way, or why
Sure.
are you feeling that way? That's what I'm hearing you say about the word disenfranchised grief. Am I
Yeah.
on the right track?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it really hurts our heart when we can't share the loss of a marriage openly, even though it might be the right thing to get a divorce. It might have been an abusive relationship. It's still painful because we're human. We can't forget that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's continue talking about loss. Can you
Mm.
describe for our viewers what is an ambiguous loss?
Mm. Well, with an ambiguous loss, you might have a physical presence, but a psychological or emotional absence. So that may mean that maybe you're getting a divorce because your loved one has dementia. And so there's still that physical presence, but psychological absence. Or maybe your spouse was a drug addict and abusive, and you're getting a divorce because of that. So again, there's that physical presence, but a psychological absence. Taking it away from divorce, I just did a program last week for NICU nurses, those nurses in the ICU. And they said that that's a physical presence, but psychological, emotional absence because, you see the baby there, but they're not right there because they're hooked up to so many things. Also, there is the physical absence, but psychological or emotional presence. So someone is missing, you're getting a divorce from a person who's been missing for 5 years. You don't know if he's dead or alive. And so you're getting a divorce. That's a physical absence, but psychological presence. Foster parents, when you have to give a child back in foster care because foster placement ends, that too is a physical absence, but psychologically, emotionally, you're connected. And the divorce is a death of a marriage. And so we have to look at disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss and all these really crazy, weird words to describe something that we're going through in our own unique way. And it is a painful thing to go through. And it is so important to forget about the words that I'm describing, but look into deep within ourselves and say, okay, some of the things she's talking about make sense to me and some of them don't. What resonates in me and what do I need to know today to manage my grief? What characteristics right now are really impacting me? She mentioned suddenness of the divorce. I wasn't expecting these papers. I don't even know what to do. I don't even know who to call. It becomes a dispositional crisis. And that's why it's so important to know that there are attorneys like yourself. There are websites like you have, and that we're not alone. We're not alone as we navigate disenfranchised grief, ambiguous loss. She's telling all these words. I don't even know. I can't even breathe. So the bottom line is we become educated, we become empowered, and we take in what we need in that moment and we let the rest go because we are so overwhelmed by our experience. I think if we take away anything from this, we understand that we are grieving a loss. We need to identify what's impacting that grief and learn what we can, ways to manage that grief, to understand that maybe there are things to do, maybe tasks to accomplish to just get through this terrible period in our lives.
And that's why we're at Up a Notch Learning. We've got interviews and book club episodes and resources on so many different topics. When our viewers watch any number of these videos today, they might take away these points, and then if they watch these videos a month from now or 6 months from now, they may take away certain other things. And that's no different for this particular episode, because there are things that people will take away based on the current situation of how they feel. And that will really, hopefully, that's the purpose of these videos and these episodes, is to really help people wherever they're at to learn new skills and gain new tools to help them through, because that's what people need in order to build and create resilience. Resilience, in my view, is not just something that happens. It's something that's created, that's built through tools, resources, skill building. And then you become resilient. And you, as a parent, as a resilient and healthy parent, can help your children to do the same thing and to build that resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Absolutely. I was also going to mention, with respect to the back to the ambiguous loss piece, is I was thinking about the psychological and physical, the difference between the presence of on psychological level and the physical level. And when we're talking about divorce, thinking about if someone was left, so they're not the one who leaves the relationship, but they're the one that was left by the other spouse. An example of that perhaps would be where your spouse is physically gone from the home, you're physically still in the home, but psychologically they're still there and they're still impacting so many aspects of your life. And it's really hard to separate those two because you're still attached psychologically, but physically they're not present.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what an ambiguous loss is in relation to divorce.
And it could also be the reverse if there's so many families where they live separated under one roof. And when people come to see me, they say, we've been separated for 2 years. We've still been living in the same home. I've been living in the basement, or the other person's been living in the basement. And so psychologically, there is that loss, but physically there's still that presence. And so that in and of itself is also perhaps I'm trying to use examples in my words to bring to the forefront the kinds of concepts that you're talking about. Am I on the right track?
What's so important, you said use my own words. As a bereavement specialist, I use my words. As an attorney, you use your words. And what's beautiful about this is that our listeners and our viewers today are going to take this and put it into their words. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Barbara, you talk about the 4 tasks of mourning model to manage divorce grief. Can we go into that?
It's William Worden's model of grief, and it can be applied to any type of loss, whether it is a divorce or non-death related loss, or a sudden death, or an anticipatory loss. The first task is to accept the reality of loss. You have to really come face to face with the reality that your spouse is not going to return. How do you do that? How do you accept that reality? Well, when you take off his or her number from your cell phone, when you give away items that belong to them that they no longer want, when you actually do tasks. Someone just told me last week, and it was someone who was getting a divorce, said that she took her husband's coffee cup and put it in the garbage. And that was huge because for over 15 years, every single day she had her coffee and he had his coffee. And that helped her accept the reality that he was not coming back because of that one task of throwing away the coffee cup. So that's the first task. The second task is to work through the pain of grief. This is a painful experience, divorce. Even if you wanted it, even if it's the best thing for you, it's still painful. So you have to work through the anger, the guilt, the sadness. You can't avoid your feelings or suppress your feelings. You have to feel it in order to go through it. So that's the second task. The third task is to adjust to the environment where your spouse is missing. That's very, very interesting. They just go missing. So maybe your spouse always emptied the dishwasher, and now you're every single day emptying the dishwasher. You're reminded that you are no longer married every time you empty the dishwasher. Your role, your finances, raising a child alone. Maybe you have to find a job. So you're adjusting now where this person is missing. That's the third task. And last is to find an enduring connection to your partner who is no longer married to you while embarking on a new life. Maybe you could think of the day that you got married, how happy you were, or the day that you had your child, and just fond memories to create a spiritual connection because that physical bond is severed. And so that's the last one. And especially you might even form a new relationship. So that's the last task of grief. I love William Worden's model on the 4 tasks because it gives us something to do in our divorce. And we understand I have to really work at this in order to get through it. And it acknowledges your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your physical reactions, and your spiritual belief system. And I think it really works.
I want to go back to number 2 that you were talking about, the going to those pain points. And in many different episodes that we have here at Up a Notch Learning, we talk about specifically that is going to those pain points, talking to a therapist or a counselor to help you to work through those and to get to that place of working through your grief and to healing. And if they're suppressed, if those things are pushed under the carpet, they will pop up at some point. And when you're trying to live your life 5 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later, those things will pop up if you don't take that time and the opportunity to go to those pain points. And so that's a real theme that we have here at Up a Notch Learning. So I'm really happy to hear when you talk about specifically that particular task.
It's hard to go to the pain point because they don't know if they'll ever come out of it. And it's frightening to feel the anger because that anger can become rage. And if I'm filled with rage, will I ever be able to be calm again and deep breathe and be mindful of my own health? It's scary, but trust yourself. Just trust that it's okay to go into those pain points and that you have the power or the resilience, as you noted, to come back from it. And it is a process, and it is a healthy process, and it is a normal process. Even so many people that say, I think I'm going crazy. You're not. You're just experiencing this grief due to a divorce.
Mm-hmm. And so many times people feel like they're just absolutely drowning and they can't, and they're overwhelmed and they feel like they can't get past that. Let's talk a little bit about that feeling of drowning and how do we get through it?
We talked about this before when you talked about the roller coaster, and I love metaphors because I can't share with you what it's like to experience a death. It's too painful. I can't share what it's like to experience a divorce. It's too painful. I can't share what it's like to experience a separation because it's too painful. But maybe through metaphor, by saying, I feel like I'm drowning. The waves of loss keep making me feel like I'm sinking under the waves or I'm going under. It gives the other person an opportunity to say, I'm going to pull you out of that undertow. I'm going to be here for you as an attorney or through Up a Notch Learning to make sure that you don't drown. That even though you feel like there's going to be another wave and another wave and another wave, I know how to get you back to shore. And so we help each other through our metaphors when that pain point is so hard to describe, the anger, the rage, the sorrow, all those feelings, that we share it through metaphor. So it's so important to know that we're not alone and that there are people like you who are going to help us so we don't drown. Mm-hmm. You give us that raft, you throw a raft to us or a life jacket or, That's what it is.
And, of course, families will, or separating spouses will feel drowning in different areas of their life on this roller coaster of the emotions. And so one day you might feel drowning or overwhelmed with respect to the finances or with respect to the emotions or with respect to the tasks that are in front of you, like we have to sell our home and feel overwhelmed by that prospect and getting the house ready and declutter, all of these different things. So you're right, Barbara, that there are different divorce professionals that can help when you're going through this process, depending on how you're the kind of drowning that you're feeling. So it's important to find those people.
But you know what? You are hitting it right on the head. When you find these people like yourself, then it goes from another metaphor, which I just thought of, which is being adrift at sea. I feel like I'm adrift at sea, like I'm lost on top of the ocean. I'm drifting. Yeah, I'm in limbo. I'm in a state of uncertainty. And you see me out there and you put your flash on me and I know, I'm going to be saved. I'm going to be okay. I just think we need to maybe look at what you do as like a floating device and like, you're going to help us cope. You're going to help us, keep our faith, keep, notice what friends we have in our life, up a notch learning that we're not going to drown. You're going to offer us resources to get help. We just have to make sure that, we take off that bathing suit, put clothes on, and go through life,
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
and as our resources grow at Up a Notch Learning, we're constantly adding new episodes and new tools and new resources, and hopefully over time, it'll get to the exponential level that families will be able to really pick and choose all of the different things that they uh, different areas that they need help in, because they're all in different categories.
Mm, that's
Mhm.
great.
How do people make meaning out of a divorce?
Making meaning is about finding it's not about making sense. It's about finding a way to make meaning out of what happened. And what does meaning mean to you? Maybe it means, I'm coping. I'm dealing with the challenges of being divorced. Or you may make meaning by lifestyle changes. I'm drinking less. My spouse and I drank a lot, and now I'm no longer drinking. So I'm exercising and drinking more. So I'm making meaning by coping and changing the way I live my life. You might also say I make meaning by valuing my life. What happened to me? It was really rough going through the separation, but it did not kill me. And so I value who I am as a person going through life right now as a single person. You might make meaning with family bonds. You realize that your family is more important now than it ever was, and they're there for you through the rough patches. Maybe valuing relationships. Maybe you really appreciate your strong network of friends, or you're returning more than ever. Uh, you might experience personal growth or post-traumatic growth. You have greater strength and changed priorities. You just the meaning that you've made out of this could be very, very positive. However, it can also be very negative. The world is not a safe place. I don't trust anyone anymore. And that's okay, because that's how you make meaning. Or you may not make meaning at all. So you could pause if you're listening to this right now. Just think for a moment, how am I making meaning out of this mess I'm in? How am I making meaning out of the decision to end this marriage? How am I making meaning of what I'm going through? You're an attorney. What would you say how most people make meaning? What would you say?
For the families that I work with, I really try to help them to try to see something positive in this, and to try to see some way that this can lead to some personal growth, and look for the pieces of the pie that have been missing in their life. Because if we think of our life as a pie, and every slice has, sometimes one slice might take a little bit more room than the other slices, and maybe you've been missing some things for quite some time, especially if you're the person who has been left and who this wasn't their choice, and would frankly prefer to stay in the relationship, and it's
Yes.
you don't have a choice in it if the other person has chosen to leave. Is to really try to figure out, how can you balance that pie a little bit more, and what parts of your life can you look at that say that you where you can say, I've been missing these parts. Maybe you haven't seen
Mm.
your family of origin very much. For example, at Christmas we always went to my spouse's family's home for the holidays, and now I'm going to start
Yes.
developing my own traditions with my own family. I'm going to start visiting my family more. I'm going to expand my friends list, or I'm going to refocus on those friendships that I have lost over the years, or what have you.
The
And so,
reconnection. I
yeah,
love that. The meaning, I find meaning in my divorce is that I've lost connections with people that I really cared
yeah,
about, and I'm going to bring them back into my life. That's a beautiful
yeah.
thing.
Focus on the positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to go to my very favorite part of every interview, which is our top 3 tips. So what would be
Mm.
your top 3 tips for our viewers to help them to manage the grief of going through a separation or divorce?
I created the Fabulous Principle. And with the Fabulous Principle, it's Fabulous. And the F is cognitive flexibility. So I would say be open minded. This has never happened to you before, or if it has happened to you before, it's still a new experience, and be open minded with the way you approach the world. A is about having a positive attitude. So when things get tough, try to maintain a positive attitude, keep your boundaries, be united with other people, keep your sense of humor. I would also say self compassion, that's the S in the Fabulous Principle, but be kind to yourself. Even when things go wrong, just be kind and realize that others are going through a divorce too. You're not alone in this experience. The third thing I would say is be authentic. Continue to be who you are. You know your needs. You know who you are. Authenticity is about knowing my needs and expressing them without fear of rejection. So going to an attorney, speaking to a friend, sharing your experience openly and honestly, genuinely, and don't feel like someone's going to reject you. So you're going to feel disenfranchised that we talked about before. This is your process. You deserve happiness and you are doing what's best for you and your family. And just realize that you are not alone. That is the most important thing that we really realize. Reach out for your faith and your belief system and dig deep into your sense of self, the core of who you are, what you value about yourself, and know that you will get through this. Get into the pain points, but know that you will get out of them. I think I gave you more than three. Sorry about that.
And I love it. I was going to sort of sum that up as divorce wellness. And that's one of the courses that we have here at Up a Notch Learning is how to focus on divorce wellness and why that's important. And so to reinvigorate those parts that of your life that have been missing, and to reach out for support, and to really be open and transparent and going to those pain points so that you can manage through the grief so that you can get past that grief. Yeah. So thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us today on another episode of Healthy, Thriving Family After Divorce. And thank you again to our viewers for tuning in. Please check out our other episodes in our interview series and our book club and all of our other resources that we have here in our Up a Notch Learning community. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.